I think we can all appreciate these are exceptional times, but there was a moment within them when it seemed like we were actually all in this together. A crisis hit us, and while we are rocketed to our core, our instincts appeared to be to protect the collective. Across the political divide, we found common ground in our understanding that this pandemic does not discriminate between rich and poor. And the policies that we enacted quickly were one that I would argue were founded in solid, socially democratic principles. A single-tier health service based on need, not ability to pay, appeared overnight. We applauded our healthcare professionals, knowing full well we owe them a debt of gratitude that will require more than that gesture alone. And we found a renewed sense of appreciation for our retail workers, our food processors, our cleaners, who have absolutely lived up to the fact that they are essential workers, essential now, many would argue always have been. And finally, the state started to pay our childcare workers. But most radically of all, the state enacted a welfare safety net that provided dignity to those who needed it and ensured that they could meet the cost of living without experiencing the same difficulties that is faced by 680,000 people in this country who lived below the poverty line before the pandemic struck. The pandemic unemployment payment was always understood to be temporary, but it was infinitely more symbolic than that. It was a recognition by this state that welfare rates were too low, and where there always seemed to be a cohort for whom the state were willing to accept and allow to live in poverty, that seemed no longer acceptable now that the more professional classes were at risk of having to experience this same reality. And now in the last couple of weeks, the powers that be have rightly started to stress that we need to hold firm. That despite the optimism of falling death and infection rates and the loosening of restrictions, we must continue to be vigilant because the danger has not yet passed. But alas, it seems that neither has the danger or the spectre of austerity, the legacy of punching down, of blaming low-paid workers and vulnerable groups for the enormity of the economic challenges that we are about to face. The rhetoric has changed now. It no longer seems that we are all in this together. And Minister, I welcome the fact that you've disassociated yourself from comments, but you're in a particularly anomalous position, and I think we still need to confront the fact that statements have been made over the last week. Statements from the Taoiseach and spokespersons from both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil respectively. They've started to view unfairness in the system and divert their aim towards those who previously would have been on a low wage and now have, shockingly, the opportunity to avail of €350 a week. Perhaps those who cry foul will do well to think of who these workers are, and it's important that we develop a fuller picture. These are workers who previously have worked in what we've come to define as the gig economy. They're likely on a minimum wage or just above it. They serve as our meals, they work in restaurants and pubs, and very rarely get to spend weekends or evenings with their family. Over the last year, a couple of years, when ministers have talked of full employment, these are the same cohort who bred a little bit of a lie to that statement, and they were more uttered under the breath, because it's these same cohort of people who are living in precarious employment, who don't have the right hours, who are paid too low. These are people for whom the rent freeze really mattered, because they are paying extortionate rents while living in overcrowded conditions. And these are the group who will be most impacted as we cut the pandemic unemployment payment, for these are the very same cohort who are consistently exploited in our labour market. And I would challenge anybody, whether they be some of the business groups who've been out talking over the last couple of days, whether it be members of this chamber or columnists, who say that we should reduce a person's wage, to equally stand forward and say that we should bring forward legislation that protects the same cohort of workers, to ensure that they are paid a living wage, that they are safe in their employment, that they no longer have to face precarious working hours. But rather, what we seem to be talking about is to make inequality the deliberate outcome of our social welfare system. You know, in a decent society, the state would trust that money accrued in this time by vulnerable groups will come back to the state coffers naturally through VAT, when a mother in a one-parent family uses it for food, when she goes out and buys a pair of football boots, when a person on previously on a low income goes out and buys a coffee or has a pint with their friends. That money is going to come back naturally. We've heard some incredible figures in these estimates. But they're going to stimulate every town, every city, every high street shop, and it's going to be an essential stimulation for our economy as it starts to open back up. Minister, I want to ask you a question just at this point, and I might come back as well if we have time. I want to ask you about a report that was in the Irish Examiner on Friday, which made reference to some of these payments, and specifically one that was most worrying was in relation to this, the clawback, which was in brackets, so I presume it came from some department official. It said recipients of emergency payments, such as lone parents who are in receipt of other welfare payments, are likely to face a clawback of money of over £1,000 by way of a respective means testing. Firstly, the language of clawback is dehumanising and shouldn't be part of our vocabulary in this instance. But, Minister, is that your understanding, that people who are receiving the pandemic unemployment payment, who are in vulnerable cohorts, such as one-parent families, may have to have some of their wages reduced in the weeks and months to come?
Minister.
The two questions that you've asked me, the COVID-19 money, I actually totally agree with you. And I know the narrative is growing, and I wish to God it wasn't. But every single euro will be spent in our economy, whether it's by an 18-year-old, a 28-year-old or a 38-year-old, exactly in the manner that you've just described. And I think it's very welcome and very needed. I don't know who is leaking to any of our newspapers, but I have to tell you now, it's certainly not me. But whoever's leaking is wrong, because I know I won't be the minister for very much longer, but I would challenge any minister after me to do what was suggested in that document, because it's shameful and it just won't happen. So I can guarantee for as long as I'm here, it won't happen.
Gary Gannon.
Thank you, Minister. It's a very welcome statement. I'll just conclude by saying that some of the figures that we've talked about, well, eye-watering in terms of the estimates and certainly eye-catching and historic, they're actually just how a republic responds. We've experienced a catastrophe, and this is how a republic should respond to protect people who are most vulnerable. I think what will define us in this period is the lessons that we've learned. There should be no more austerity on the table. So many people have already experienced austerity in the last decade. They've never recovered yet, and they've nothing left to offer. So whether it's in the short term or the long term, there should be no more conversations of austerity. We need fiscally stimulate our economy by investing in our people, providing legislation that protects our workers, and demonstrating the lessons that we've learned. This pandemic has illuminated inequalities that already exist. If we are going to learn and emerge from this better, as we've often said we will, let's apply those lessons. Thank you, Ken Collins.
Thank you, Deputy